Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our bite-sized webinar. Today, we're going to be taking a look at one of the most significant employment law reforms, I think, in a number of years now, which is due to the changes to the unfair dismissal, which was introduced by the Employment Rights Act 2025, which, as we know, received royal assent back in December. And today we're going to cover all that we can kind of anticipate so far for preparing for those changes to unfair dismissal. So we're going to look at the removal of the current 2-year qualifying period for ordinary unfair dismissal claims and the government's proposed introduction of that initial statutory probation period, which is currently expected to be up to 6 months. So we're going to look at how the new framework is expected to work in practice and what it means for employers when you're recruiting, managing performance and any conduct concerns, and ending employment during early stages of employment. So as with as much of the Act, some of the detail is still being developed as far as we know, through consultation and secondary legislation and all of that. So what we'll do today is we'll highlight the practical steps that you can take and you can start to think about now. So the aim today is we've got a 25-minute webinar, and we're not going to get into every technical detail, but we will give you a clear understanding of what's changing, the likely risks for employers, and what you should be doing now to prepare. And, for a long time now, employers have worked on the basis that ordinary unfair dismissal, I think it was 2012 when the last legislation change was, it went from 1 year up to 2 years. So for all of that time, businesses have been looking on the basis that ordinary unfair dismissal risks usually start after 2 years service. And if that qualifying period moves to 6 months, the practical impact is immediate, really, and it affects all of your recruitment, how you recruit, your onboard and probation, performance management, and obviously your dismissal decisions. So as we go through, we'll just bear in mind the question of, because we'll talk a lot about probationary, what would your current probation process stand up to scrutiny now if the unfair dismissal protection started after 6 months rather than 2 years? So if we just have a look at that implementation timeline, we're looking at where we are now in 2026, an opportunity for us, just coming up to mid-June now. By the time we get into July, we're going to be looking at anyone who's been recruited come the 1st of January will have that 6-month service. So that day one right for them by January 2027 kicks in. So that's the implementation timeline there, when this is the time when really you should review contracts, your policies, probation processes, manage any capability issues that you might have. And then by January 2027, your managers need to be ready to spot concerns early, hold the right conversations, document them properly, and really make those decisions in good time. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of businesses tend to make with legal reform is waiting until the change arrives, and then by then the habits are all they're already fixed. The employer who adapts best are usually the ones who start to improve management discipline well in advance. So we really want to be looking at preparing as much as you can between now and the end of this year. So if we look, which we will talk a little bit more in more detail about what to prepare for, but if we look at the current position where we are now, there is at the moment, most employees need 2 years continuous service before they can bring an ordinary unfair dismissal claim. So that's shaped employee behaviour for a long time, like I say, since 2012, but it has never really meant that there's a completely risk-free period. Day one risks do still exist because there's the discrimination element, whistleblowing element, and the certain automatic unfair dismissal claims that employees have from day one of employment. So that hasn't changed. That's still will always be there, regardless of the 6-month statutory probation. But so that fair process can always, it always matters. If there is discriminatory or whistleblowing elements, that day one right does matter. But the difference is that employees will gain an unfair dismissal protection much earlier, meaning that businesses will need to follow a much fair process sooner in the employment relationship. So where you thought, we've got 2 years to get somebody in, top form, and then we'll look at if we needed to remove that person within the 2 years, that will no longer be viable. You would need to do that within 6 months. And that's exactly what's changing. So, that window shrinks from 2 years to 6 months. And I guess it's a major shift, really. Issues that managers might once have kind of let slide or let drift will need a little bit more attention, and as I say, a lot much earlier. Feedback to employees will need to happen sooner, and decisions will need to happen sooner. The legal change would matter, but the day-to-day impact on management practice is really what's the bigger point here, making sure that our managers are trained to spot any issues earlier on and being able to make those decisions and not let the probationary period slide and put the business at risk. So if we look at why does this matter? And in practice, it's because many businesses already know where the pressure points are. We know that best practice is to do reviews and one-to-ones and probationary meetings, but they do get delayed and they do get put, by the by, and those difficult conversations sometimes get avoided because people just generally don't want to have them, or maybe the conduct or concerns with your employee is not really serious enough, and you think, oh, they'll get better, they'll improve, and then before you know it, that probationary period has already passed by default, or the 2 years has passed, and then you just kind of continue with the way you are with underperforming employees. So a lot of our concerns are talked about informally within our businesses, but and not always documented properly. So with this 6-month qualifying period, those bad habits, or those habits that you don't think are bad, will now carry a lot more risk. So the shift here is from reactive management to proactive management, and that earlier action becomes the much, much safer approach. And if we take a look at, what will this cost if we do get it wrong? And, this is where the risk becomes very tangible. Yet the compensation matters, and that's always going to be a cost for any unfair dismissal. And that includes, a basic award and a compensatory loss. But in many cases, the bigger drain is the management time and the legal spend. The time we have to spend preparing for dealing with ACAS and preparing for preliminary hearings and tribunals, and those legal fees in the end just go up and up and up. So unnecessary. So, people have to investigate, prepare documents, draft statements, attend hearings, and deal with all those wider employee relations impacts. So, there can also be real settlement pressure, even when the employer believes that it has a good defence. So I suppose one legal caution to keep in mind is, at the moment, for an unfair dismissal claim, that is currently capped. So the compensatory award for ordinary unfair dismissal is currently capped at 1 year's gross pay. And then from January, that additional change is that compensatory award is expected to become uncapped. So there's also an increase, in the potential employer liability with that. Of course, that uncapped exposure is already a key issue in day one for automatic unfair dismissal or any discrimination style claim. There's no cap on those claims, and those statutory caps may not apply at all. So that will also be something else to consider. It will be an additional cost. It wouldn't normally be where at the moment you could say, what is that potential risk? What does that unfair dismissal claim cost look like? Oh, it might be equivalent to a redundancy entitlement, like 5 weeks pay for 5 week service, whereas that now is potentially going to be unknown, uncapped from January 27. So if we have a look at what those hidden risks look like, and for me here, the hidden risk is within the timing, and employers often focus on future hires and people who are already employed. Might, that might be the real issue that we're not dealing with. So, in particular, as I said earlier at the start of our meeting, the employees recruited during 2026 may gain protection much sooner than your managers are expecting. So, as an example, an employee who you've hired maybe in April this year would have around 9 months service when that new rule takes effect on 1st January 27. And they're expected to gain those unfair dismissal protection immediately rather than having to wait until they reach the 2-year service. So obviously that's why it makes sense to review what those current probationers and anyone with live performance or conduct concerns now, rather than assuming that there is still plenty of time. So, I don't want to say remove everybody who needs, some training and additional learning or anything like that. But now is, that is the risk, is that you think, oh, we've already recruited them in April. This doesn't come in until January. That probation period will already be gone. So by January, they will have that day one right from then. So if we have a look on what should we start to do now in terms of your workforce, and what can we do to help ourselves and have a look at where are we up to, what do we need to do so as that we can address any unresolved performance or conduct issues. And it's exactly that. It's just audit your own workforce now. Have a real look at what issues are there. Is the people within your business who have got those, who really are underperforming, and you're thinking, they're not going to make it, they're not going to meet the standards, but we're just kind of, unable to deal with it at this moment in time. What is still sitting in probation and what has drifted beyond it? And then I suppose asking ourselves the question is, could those concerns actually be evidenced if they were challenged? So what we are going to have to be able to demonstrate within that 6-month probation period is why we are removing somebody. So because it's such a short window, tribunals are now there's going to be an expectation that 6-month probation period is actually managed. So it's not just a window opportunity for employers to remove poor employees, or because it's just not working out, or because their attitude just doesn't fit the culture. We have to be able to demonstrate why. And, we've only got that 6-month window to do that. So that probation review period is really important on what that looks like, so that we're able to evidence and demonstrate the reasons why we're removing somebody. So I think the main problem with most employers is that obviously everybody's so busy, and these things, as I said earlier, these things do kind of get missed. But problem for many employers is not that they don't have a probation process, it's that it's just not actively managed. Most of our clients' contracts have either got a 3-month or a 6-month probation period in it, and a lot of them come to us after that 6-month period and want to extend a probation, but after that 6 months it's already passed by default. So we know that there's managers don't actively manage those probation periods, and the reviews get missed, the conversations get delayed, and then those decisions obviously get pushed back. And then once that happens, the value of that probation starts to fall away quickly. So I suppose the key thing here is simple: is probation only works if it's structured, if it's timely, and that we document it. And with that 6-month qualifying period, getting those basics right matters even more now than it has before. So if we have a look at what those top 5 employer mistakes that we see, and that is generally there is no clear objective set. The reviews are missed. Concerns are raised too late. There's poor documentation of any concerns or underperformance, and managers seem to be avoiding those difficult conversations. And what is really striking is that none of those are a legal issue. They're all management failures first, but if they're left unchecked, they are exactly what tends to create the legal risk later on. So it's really important that we get our managers up to date with this legislation, and we empower them to have those difficult conversations, and we train them to have those difficult conversations so as that these probation periods are being addressed, that they're being reviewed and they're being documented correctly. Okay, and then if we have a little look at a common myth, and that is that the probation somehow acts as though it's a legal shield. You know, a lot of our clients call up and they go, "Oh, but the probation is there, we're safe, we've got that probation," but it doesn't. It's a useful management tool, but it's not necessarily a defence to statutory rights. So what reduces risk is good process and clear expectations for reasonable decisions, proper documentation, and managers acting in time. But that's so that the legal caution here is taken into consideration. Being in probation doesn't remove the need to handle issues fairly and carefully. So if we look at what does good probation look like, and it starts right at the beginning. When you employ somebody from day one, that's when their probation starts. So if we're recruiting somebody, as I say, from July this year, they're going to have that 6-month probation, and that's going to end in January. So by January, the 1st of January, that employee will have that day one right to unfair dismissal. So we need to make sure those expectations need to be clear from day one. The reviews should be planned and structured and not left until there's a problem. So if concerns do come up, they can be recorded there and then at the time and kind of not reconstructed months later. If you find that you're in a position where you haven't documented any of underperformance or any issues, then what we kind of do is look and go, oh, we've got a week left before that probation period is up, and we try and reconstruct it months later of what that past underperformance looks like. And although the tribunal will have a slightly lighter touch on what those documented reviews are, it's still going to be what was we asked them to do? What were the expectations? Did we identify the areas of concern? Were they given time to improve? Was training implemented? So where we would look at all of those things for somebody now over 2 years, when we want to remove somebody, it will be a little bit of a lighter touch on that, but the same process and the same thing has to happen. You still have to have those things in place. So the key point is to reach a decision early before issues become much harder to manage. Make those decisions earlier on. And then if we look at, we know it's a change. We're going from 2 years to 6 months, but a lot of this is, the real change is actually behavioural. The key shift is that it's an older mindset. We've got plenty of time. We've got 2 years before we to remove somebody, and that new mindset now needs to be that we need to act early. And that means earlier conversations, earlier support, earlier intervention, and like we'd said before, better records. And in practice, the mindset change will often make the difference between a defensible decision and a difficult claim. So acknowledging the fact that we know what's coming, what do we need to change in-house with our managers, and a lot of that is the mindset, and that 2-year window is no longer there. So if we take a look at what will a tribunal ask, we touched on it a little bit before. So if a case does end up in front of a tribunal, core questions would usually be, the tribunals are not looking for perfection. They're looking for fairness and reasonableness. And was there a genuine concern? Did the employee know what the issue was? Was support or an opportunity to improve offered? And was that final decision a reasonable one that an employer could make? So those questions are a bit of a useful guide for you and your managers from the very start of employment. And then if we look at what the tribunal flow chart looks like, it shows that the practical route employers should follow. And that starts with the concern. We move on to a discussion. We put support in place. We review what happens next, and then we make a decision. And I know it seems like a little bit of a tick box in terms of what that process looks like with every new employee, but really that's what it is. It's that structure, and it's as simple as that we just need to put in place from the offset of recruitment. And that sequence really matters, because employers who follow a clear and structured process are usually going to be in a much stronger position than those who jump straight from concern to a dismissal. So in many cases, a simple and consistent process provides the best defence. So if you were to implement that, that would put you in a safer position to defend any unfair dismissal claim after that 6 months. That's what you would need to be able to identify to a tribunal, to demonstrate to a tribunal. Okay, so if we have a brief look at managing poor performance, really a key message really here is to deal with these issues early. Getting our line managers to try and not to avoid doing these performance reviews, and managers should avoid kind of vague comments and general concerns, and really document down that specific feedback of what the underperformance or what that poor performance looks like, and be able to back that up with examples, and clearly linked to the standards that are expected. So this is what you were employed to do. This is what you're expected to do. This is what you do, and this is what you're not doing. This is where you need to be. We've asked you to change that. We've supported you with that, with additional training, and you're not meeting the standards. And that is our clear documentation of it, of us having those meetings, having those conversations, getting them documented, making sure that the employee understands what needs to improve and what good looks like, and the time frame for getting there. So in terms of the documentation, I know we always kind of go on about go record it and make a note of it and do a file note, but it really does matter the amount of times that people come to us and say, look, we want to remove someone, they're not meeting the standards, and we'll ask, or can you send us the one-to-one reviews, or what email trails have you got where you've asked for improvements and you've told them where they're up to, and there's nothing there. So this is where the documentation really matters. If a tribunal claim does arise, then the documents are often the strongest evidence that you've got. So keep clear records of objectives, reviews, training, support that was offered, concerns raised, and the decision that you made, generally with the rationale for that decision. So that, it's not just that helps from a legal risk point of view, but it also tends to improve the overall quality of management as well. If we get those processes in place, it's actually identifying areas of concern as well as identifying what's good and what's working well. So if we take a look at the top 5 actions before January 2027, at the moment, I would say the first one would be to review all your current probationers. Don't assume that you've got, the 2 years to assess suitability. Employees recruiting during this year, employees recruited during this year will gain that unfair dismissal protection sooner than expected, and that will be from January 27. So I would do that now. I would look at who's in probation, who's not performing to standards, and put that in motion of whatever needs to be done. Address performance and conduct concerns. So where concerns already exist, start managing them. And it doesn't necessarily mean to say managing them to be managed out or to be removed. Start managing them. Stop delaying those difficult conversations, because they'll just leave you dealing with those issues once that employee has that unfair dismissal, right? So again, do that now. Start that now. Have those conversations. Strengthen your probation processes. So making sure that probation reviews are taking place and that the documents are properly, and that they are supported by clear objectives, proper feedback and decision making. And then training your managers is so important. If people don't know what to do, they'll avoid doing it. And a lot of managers have become used to the flexibility of that 2-year qualifying period, so they just have a tendency to skip them. And of course, they'll need the confidence in having to have those performance conversations, document the concerns and follow that fair process. So training our managers is really, really important in this. And then review the dismissal. What is your dismissal and capability procedure? What does that look like at the moment? What do your policies and your probation processes look like? Do we have manager guidance that needs to be updated so that your business is ready for a workforce with a much earlier unfair dismissal protection? And then I think the biggest mistake that employers can make is thinking that you've got until January 2027 to prepare for this. As I said before, employees who are hired today are going to be protected much sooner than we realise. So we really do need to act now on it and get those processes and get that training for line managers in place. So if we look at a probation toolkit checklist, what does that look like? What does the toolkit itself entail? And is it just something that businesses are thinking, now I've got to start doing, I don't know, 5 one-to-ones a month or something like that? Really, if we get the process and we've got the toolkit ready, it is a simple process if we've got the structure of it. A solid probation toolkit will give your managers the consistency, and it means that they're not relying on memory or habit or personal preference or what they used to do when they work somewhere else. Instead, they'll have the correct policies in place, the right letters in place, the right forms and the guidance in front of them. And it will be less of a task or less of a daunting task if you've got some new and first-time managers. And that will help, the business follow a fair process and make those decisions much easier, obviously to defend if they are challenged later. So, our clients know that we've got all of those probation toolkits and everything at the ready, for everything that you need, down to one-to-one forms, and all of those probationary invite letters, outcome letters, all of those things that we can absolutely support with. And then if we go on to actually, in addition to how we're supporting our clients, where we come in a HPC, we the support we offer, it's practical, it's hands-on, and we want to help your businesses put those right processes in place. We can support you with spotting those risks early and managing those issues before they do become claims. So I suppose the message is that we're not just here when something goes wrong. We want to be able to help and support you navigate change and stay ahead of the problem. So if you think that your business at the moment doesn't have any of these things in place, then you can get in touch with us and we'll support you with that and what that looks like, and put that all into a nice, easy flow structure for you. So what should we do? What should we do from tomorrow? And if we think back to the beginning, the first slide, first review the current probationers, check whether reviews are actually happening and that they're happening on time. Identify any concerns that are still unresolved, and then make sure that your managers know what a good probation management looks like. Tighten up the records, keep them. Really, in short, we don't want to be waiting for a problem to escalate. We want to start now. So key takeaways from today, really, before we just close, is the legal reform matters. You know, the bigger lesson is operational. We know that the law is changing. We know that it's going to be a day one right for those who have completed the probation period by January 27. And those who will come into the business, new recruits who would recruit from January 27, will only have that 6 months, and then they can claim unfair dismissal. So for businesses and employers who are in the strongest position will be the ones who act early, manage their probation actively, and document the decisions properly. And that's going to be able to reduce the risks in practice, and it'll put you in a much better position, whatever final legislation detail looks like. We know that initially this change was supposed to be a day one right to unfair dismissal, and government changed that legislation changed and went to the 6 months. So although the legislation changes and we still don't have anything definitive on this legislation, the change is going that way. So regardless, if anything does change, these processes and these practices are not going to do any harm for your business. And I think that's it. We're done for today. We have got a slide for some questions, but not sure whether we've got enough time now. But we can always, you can always drop a note in, and any questions that we can follow up on those answers for you. And I know Maisie always sends out a recording of the webinar for anyone who's been unable to attend today, or if you wanted to share it with your line managers or anything like that. But thank you for attending and for taking the time out. I know it's only short ones, but it's easier for us to get half an hour out of our day for something that's so important and will obviously affect all of us, all of our businesses in the coming months and leading up into January next year. But thank you for attending, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.